Hi guys, I'm India Lossman. I'm co-founder and head of product at Boombox. We're going to do a panel discussion today talking about what product managers do and how you all could have a mindset like product managers. You guys spend a lot of time in development cycles with us, but there's other parts to our job which we're going to talk about today. And I will let everybody introduce themselves one at a time.
Sorry, this part? Yeah. I'm Deborah Cadner, and I'm co-founder and head of product for Escalera.
I'm Gal, I'm co-founder and head of product for Checksum.
My name is Peter, and I'm a lead product manager at Catch.
Nice. I forgot one thing. The clicker. Okay. Go. Just one slide, guys. That has to be like a record for product managers, a single slide. And if I drop my cue cards, I'm in trouble. So basically what we want to walk you through today is kind of the pillars of product management. There's all these things we do in our job that maybe don't get all of the exposure to you guys as where we actually spend our time. But we spend a lot of time with product discovery. Literally think of that as the why. What are the customer needs we're trying to meet? Who are we competing against in the market? And how do we look at it as a business and assess what our opportunity is for making money? Product planning, think of that as the what. That's the overall vision, all of the features and stuff underneath that lead to that vision. And it's roadmap planning. We definitely communicate that with you guys, but maybe not all of the decisions and trade-offs that we make. Product development, that's kind of where we spend our time with you. And then enablement, the release of something is just the start, right? What happens afterwards once it's in the hands of your customers? So we're going to try and kind of structure this in this capacity and move through things kind of quickly and always stop and ask for questions in between. Okay. Deborah, why don't we start with you? What are kind of the strategic needs of your particular company? Like, what are you trying to solve as an issue?
So we're in the HR technology space, and a lot of traditional tools in HR have really been the org trying to provide surveys or learnings out to the employees, but not really getting a good sense of what the culture is. And so we want to serve the employees, but then also be able to collect really interesting and authentic data back for the organization so they understand what's happening. We've seen a lot around inclusion lately, and inclusive cultures are more productive, have higher retention, and HR is kind of the last frontier for companies to really think strategically about their resource planning, unlike supply chain management or other types of management that they've done in the past. And our company is really innovating in that a lot of the traditional products in the HR space have been more tops-down programmatic and not ever given the employee value. And we're trying to change that and think about the employee first by having something that's fun and engaging for you to use, but also getting the data back.
Cool. You?
Yeah, we help companies test their software using AI. So in today's world, software becomes more and more complex, and companies today want to ship using CI/CD, basically ship as frequent and often as possible. And I feel like testing is a part of that equation that hasn't been innovated enough. And what we're trying to do is basically train a machine learning model that learns how to use our client software based on real user sessions from production. And then every time you want to ship a new version, we can just basically run a summary of everything your users did in the last week and let you know if your software works or doesn't work. And the value is obviously like ship fast, test your software without needing to spend too much time on testing automation. Let us take care of that.
And for us at Catch, we help companies fulfill their data privacy obligations. And the thing for us is that historically, a lot of that data privacy problem has been approached from a legal perspective. And so, fundamentally, the ways of doing surveys, doing compliance, isn't something that scales with modern day data privacy concerns. So we're trying to tackle it from more of a data orchestration and automation perspective to help companies essentially do that end-to-end so that problem, we can actually help address that in a scalable fashion.
So I'll keep it with you. What kind of inputs do you get to know what customer needs are?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for us, because we are in a relatively, I would say, deep B2B space, we have a lot of customer expertise from folks who have already tried to build solutions on their own, as well as inputs from people who, maybe not on the technology side, but on the legal side, on how do we interpret these legal requirements and how does that translate into business and operational requirements on their customer-specific platform. So I think we get a lot of inputs both from legal side, engineering side, and a lot of times the challenge for us in product discovery is to go beyond how the customer has initially thought about the problem. And maybe this is a segue for the product discovery question. Just like, we have to really focus on why rather than how, because how an individual customer might have interpreted the problem could be very narrow to their own needs. But we generally have to take a step back and think about why is that problem there, and how does that problem apply to the broader space.
Yeah, Boomflex is a little bit different because it's not B2B, right? We're dealing directly with customers, and with me, it's all about like, not what they try and say, hey, this is what I need as a solution. It's all about what they identify as the problem is, because we might solution it completely different, and we're hearing such a bigger volume of complaints and needs that we then aggregate up together. Did either one of you want to add on to the input question? Is it any different than Peter?
I think a lot of it is just being well-versed in the problem space you're in. At least for Checksum, it's easier because it caters to engineers, it caters to startups, but just being your customer in a sense, like understanding very well the problem space, what they're challenging, going through the steps that they should do or they need to do, and become the subject matter expertise really help to then inform your roadmap.
Agreed.
I think for us, I mean, HR, no one thinks of that as like a very transformative technology space, but it's kind of where marketing was 15 years ago, where it used to be, oh, I really think the purple ad does better than the orange ad. And then a small company like Google comes out and says, we can put data against this. And the same thing's happening in the people space. So, I just know this person's a great leader, so let's, promote them again. But when you start to get bigger companies that are putting together people analytics teams to actually look at longitudinal data about what makes a good work environment, what can help harness good employees, what brings in, but that true, that's now starting to become in the conversation. So for us, we're a B2B to C. So it's like interesting, we went B2B all the way to B2C. I'm in the middle. And so getting the buyer who is still data early to understand the value of that data and what they can do with it, but then also engage the employee who's used to a lot of consumer grade apps. They're used to Amazon giving them recommendations and Netflix giving them recommendations and being able to Google answers. And so how do we kind of bridge that gap?
And how do you assess opportunity, like in the market? Anyone want to take it?
So we're very early stage, as a lot of companies in the Hive. So I think for us, the opportunity assessment is very primary, right? It's like, should we even build this company? Should we build this product? And our focus was mainly on talking to customers and trying to just making sure this problem exists and doing as many unscalable stuff as we can in order to make sure that this is actually the right problem. So we started with, for example, just writing automated tests for companies. Like I would, in the early days, like we took a few companies and I would write automated tests for them manually, right? So this simulates what our product does, which is to generate end-to-end tests, but it tested our ability to actually get to those companies and whether they'll actually take action and what will be their feedback. So just like small ways to test certain hypotheses you have, but I think the most important thing is again, just understanding the customer really well, and if there's a problem there and you can solve it, that's the most important thing.
Yeah, for us, we're looking at how many musicians are out there, how many can we actually get on our platform, but for our business to be successful, it isn't just about getting the artists, it's about getting the fans and taking a cut of all of those interactions and all the transactions between them. So we're thinking of both things always.
Yeah, and I think for us that the opportunity assessment is interesting because the problem definitely exists. We know the requirements are out there. We know larger tech companies spend tens of millions of dollars every year on specific teams just to fulfill these privacy requirements. But the interesting analogy, though, is a lot of folks who are not necessarily on the most cutting-edge forefront of on the data orchestration side of things might think oh, well, the privacy regulators haven't really fired up their engines quite yet, so maybe we can hide in the herd, so to speak. So it's definitely interesting to see that from some of our smaller customers, but again, because of new waves of regulations, especially coming out in the US, a lot of that is very much changing. So that perception change in the market actually drives, I feel like, a lot of the speed and urgency of our deals. Because again, the problem exists for everyone. We know it's out there, we know it's not solved, and it's just a matter of urgency.
Can we take some questions from you guys? Any questions about the why, our discovery process? Don't be shy.
Let's run a mic.
Right up front. Oh.
Am I audible?
Yeah,
All right.
we can hear you.
Yeah, so my question was that you talked about talking to the customer. So my question is, at a stage where you're assessing whether or not the problem that you're trying to pursue makes sense, or should you make a company out of it, or is it a viable product? So what's the incentive for the customer to talk to you about that problem when you don't have a product for them to try on and see that if that solves the problem or not? So like, how do you approach asking them like, what are the problems in that space?
You don't tell them you don't have a product yet.
Good answer.
No, seriously. I mean, you have to go out and you have to test your theory. And I've shown lots of vaporware, right? And that's all about getting the product market fit. Have as many conversations, understand what keeps them up at night. You just have to come at it like a management consultant. Like, where are you spending your time? What's vexing you? How are you losing sleep? If you had a magic wand, I use a magic wand question all the time, and that's where you get at the core of what they're really concerned about. And then you start to triangulate with all those different conversations, and that shapes the early stages of your product.
People are not shy about telling you, like, here's how I work, here's what I need, here's what troubles me, here's my pain points. They are not shy. So I don't know. I never have a problem with lack of data. It's all around like taking it all in and figuring out what matters and what matters to the most number of people.
And you can't stop. And so actually this is really interesting because the same thing that you do to really get down to the core of what a customer's problem is, product people and engineers should also be using back and forth to each other. So you don't just ask why once. You have to keep, but why is that? And then what happens? And then what happens? And that's the same kind of conversation that should be happening internally in any, whether it's a sales team to the product people to the engineering, to the customer success people. Always continue to ask until you feel like you're really reaching a common understanding.
And all the customers I talk to, it's multiple conversations. There's some that are one and done, but most of the time they're seeing our product evolve, and we're asking them questions about what they need and showing them what we have as a solution and seeing if that works for them and iterating on it.
And I think one thing also here to know is like understanding the assumptions that's being made, right? A lot of times you have a customer who's been trying to solve this problem, maybe they don't have enough resources, which is why they're so interested in talking to you, because they think, hey, if you can help solve the problem for them, great. But they have a certain underlying set of assumptions. You might have a certain underlying set of assumptions about how this problem should be solved. Definitely make sure you address those so that you actually solve the right problem, and then you can then figure out how do you apply this problem to be their solution to that problem to scale across a wider variety of customers.
All right, thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
I think we have time for another question before we keep going.
Okay, yeah, on the why or the discovery phase, going through Catch and being in the product from the early beginnings, I learned a lot from, I call it the Vadia Chavezian School of Product Management. And there's I don't know if anyone listened to the podcast, but I did the heist talking a lot about the long con of the product vision and you know, the short steps or all the steps that you would take to kind of get out to that long con. Maybe get there, maybe you don't. It all has to be viable along the way. When it comes to discovery, however, how do you basically balance? Like, it was very hard for me to think about how do you talk to customers about maybe a near-term problem while still maybe validating the longer stages or hypotheses that you have. I'm curious, how much weight did you place on like the early wedge versus the long con? How did that happen? How does it happen? It's been a challenge for me, so I'm just curious to get y'all's perspective.
For me, it's interesting. I try and meet customers where they are and what they're interested in to kind of gauge that. You know, is this person interested in something we're doing in the long term? Then let me get some of their answers and come back to them. Yeah, for me, it's all about meeting people where they are. That's how I balance it, and I try and find a pool of people for the immediate things and have the other people in reserve for when we get there. So I have general ideas, but drill down as it gets more specific and as it gets closer.
We did not show the long-term vision. We just, again, we were in an environment where people were taking really big, really small baby steps, and so we just had to go along with them. There was only one, potential prospect out there that really saw the long-term vision, and we hired him. And you know who he is.
I think that was similar to us as well. Like, at least I see like testing automation and QA as like a very important field that's going to see a lot of innovation in the next few years, because I don't think it saw enough innovation relatively to how CI/CD and how software kind of grew up and blew. So I think there's going to be a lot of expansion in this field. But I don't think most of our customers see it today. I think most of them, that's just my point of view, our bet as Superset, but most of the customers just have a very painful problem, and they know how much time and money they spend to solve this, and how much they're willing to pay to someone else to solve it. And so I haven't really shared that type of division.
It's almost like your question leads us right into what we're going to talk about next, is like, how do you determine the business goals for your business? Like, how do you move through things? Where do features fit in? Where do headlines fit in the grand scheme of your product vision? Do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, definitely. I think we're all startups of a certain size, so there's always that consideration of how do you get the dollars? How do you get the dollars on the table to prove that people are willing to do what they say they want to solve? So I think a lot of that focus you've heard from the other panelists around short-term things is around, like, okay, if we can get to a certain milestone and deliver certain value, and customer will pay us for that milestone, that gets us to the next stage so that we can fulfill the long-term vision. So that, I think that's the part of the ruthless prioritization, right? Like, especially for us, we know there is a very large problem out there, and that problem is not only ambiguous, but it's also continuously evolving with new regulations. It's very challenging to fulfill every single part of the things, but let's think about what are the most likely areas that customers are worried about, what the regulators will focus on. Let's start with those areas to make sure we can deliver the most value to the customers, and then gradually we can get to the next step and the next step. But I think it's very helpful to have the long-term vision always in mind. Like, sometimes if you do too much of these short-term optimizations, it might lead you down a path that you essentially become like a consulting company for your customer to try to solve the exact problem for them, and then you lose sight of, again, how do you scale that solution to a wide variety of customers.
Anyone else want to answer that same question?
Yeah, sure. So again, the vision for us was very like bottoms up. We worked, we experienced this problem, and we kind of noticed some gap of the market where, if we think about cloud companies, right, AWS, GCP, Azure directly comes to mind. If you think about warehouses, it's Snowflake. If you think about, I don't know, monitoring, it's Sentry, it's Rollup. But QA automation really or quality in general, really didn't get as much love from like the tech startups. Like, everyone is doing their own thing. You constantly hear when you talk to customers, you constantly hear, yeah, we have our own framework, we set up our own metrics. So it's just not one way to do it. And there is a right way to do it if like with the advancements of AI today, there is a way you can automate those things. I just don't think it was possible 5 years ago, and also software wasn't complex enough for this need. And that's the vision that drives us. And in terms of prioritization, we always hyperly focused on like the one thing we do, which is tell you whether your software works or not. And then everything aligns to that. And every time we ask, every week when we prioritize, every month, every quarter, is like, what do we need to do in order for us to tell our customers whether the software works or not at a certain point of time. And then it becomes just much easier when you focus on like one thing only. And we also have this privilege because we're relatively small. We don't have like 4 teams and 4 product lines. We're like very small team. All of our customers work exactly the same thing. We serve, except for sizes, we serve exactly the same needs, the same archetype of customer, so it's very easy for us to prioritize.
With us, our customers hearing the long-term vision is really, really important because we're going to be an all-in-one platform play. They have to know that. We have to tell them that over and over and over again because we can't attack all those areas of product at one time. So that's part of the pitch always. And they're usually pretty invested in us and want us to be successful because they want to be on one platform and spend less money on it. So it's a good way to have the conversation. How do you evaluate that your solutions are meeting your customers' needs? Who wants to take it? Deborah?
So there are a lot of learning management systems out there, and there are very well-published statistics on what the engagement and completion rates are. And it's amazing because ours are like 20x. And when you show that to someone who's head of talent or head of learning and development at a company under the CHRO, like that's a number that they're used to seeing. And so when we can show 20x that's always a good thing, and they're really excited about that. There are other metrics that we show that are newer to them. Like I mentioned, the people analytics space is something that is just brooding now. And so that's not something that they have historical data on, but it's all about giving them information so that they now have a seat at the table so that they get higher visibility in the company. So as a CHRO, and we're seeing this have evolved in the last couple of years, it's no longer people who have traditionally been in the human management space, but more people who have come from business line owners, GMs, who are used to a P&L, who are thinking about people resources the same way you would think about other types of resources at the company. So when we're trying to upskill them and show them that they can now elevate their career, and I've seen this in the past several companies as well, that you find these visionaries who lock onto your solution, and that they see it as a way to elevate their own career, and that they then, follow you along and become your biggest proponent and probably join Tom as JSD did. So, again, back to really providing value for the customer, but customers are people and people buy from people.
Yeah, and I think one interesting thing is just like you said, it's if you can find the champions on the ground who really see the same vision as you and who's willing to help you, that's incredibly valuable for early stage companies. One other sort of maybe a little bit cynical side of things of how you can find out if the customers are using what you do. I think the reality for many of our early stage companies, we probably don't collect as much data as we should. We probably don't have as much fancy metrics to say like, oh wow, this gets a lot of usage, this gets a lot of usage there. But and we're also a platform play, like India suggested. So for early stage companies doing platform play, you have a large variety of things, but the coverage is relatively thin. But one thing that is kind of interesting is if customers are using and breaking certain things, that actually says, that's actually a pretty good signal. So, and if the customer is frustrated at something, I actually really like that. It shows that they're engaged, they want something to work, they're actively trying to do something. And that's actually a very strong signal that, hey, we need to get this going. We need to get this fixed. We need to get this workflow delivering value for them because they're, pounding your door about it. And so, I think maybe from an engineering perspective, it can be somewhat counterintuitive of like, oh, well, this thing seems super smooth sailing because no one's filing bugs. But you actually kind of want people to file bugs and kind of want them to poke holes at where your platform is weak, and that actually shows you should specifically focus on those areas.
We want to hear the problems.
Exactly.
Okay, I think we should probably hit some questions from the audience for planning. Okay, I don't think you're on.
Hi. Whoa. Hey, I have a question. So I see in the product enablement side, are we kosher to go in that column?
We're not there yet.
Okay.
Stir in trouble.
All right, skip me then.
We'll get there. Anybody planning?
I guess this relates to discovery and planning, but
Sure.
when the company gets bigger and you guys are less out in the field and you have sales teams and solution engineers and a whole bunch of people who are not product builders, how do you sort of collaborate with them and inform your priorities based on what they're hearing on the ground, assuming you're not in all of those conversations?
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up, because one thing I wanted to talk about prioritization is if you developers leave this room with anything, I hope it's a little more empathy for your product people. Because I want you to understand, we sit at the middle of everything and yet we can do nothing. Like we can't code, we don't sell, like we're not in, we have to be invited into those conversations, especially as a company gets bigger. But we're getting the inputs from the sales team. Like, I need this to close the deal. You get it from your customer success team. Our client's about to renew and they really want these set of features. Then you have engineers who have tech debt, so we know we have to attack that. They want to also build cool stuff, and you want to be able to attract cool engineers, so you want to have cool technology. And then there's the stuff you need to be able to build strategically to continue moving your roadmap forward in terms of your 5-year product vision. So you have to balance all of that. And that's why if there's one skill you have as a product person, it's ruthless prioritization. And part of that comes from really understanding the inputs from the field and weighing that. So salespeople, they're loud and they're going to come in, and then there's certain salespeople you get to know their names. They hover behind you and they breathe and oh yeah, just give me this one thing. I need this one deal. But you have to think about, well, what about my current customer base? Is that going to incur? Is that like a one-off solution and it's not really going to meet other future customer needs? And this is always going through our head. And what we should be doing and how you should hold your product people accountable is when you have questions, ask them. They're more than happy to tell you all the reasons why a certain decision is made. We owe that to developers as product people, and I'm a firm believer that the more you understand the process behind the decisions that are being made, it helps you understand the what and the why a little bit more, which is what Vivek was talking about earlier today.
Yeah. I think that question kind of gets to enablement too. We have to be transparent. We have to tell you the value prop. We have to tell you how the decisions are made, so that when we're not the ones directly having the conversation, we're all speaking the same language. Okay, time-wise, I think we're okay. Time for another question? Anyone? No? Okay, let's move on to development. This is where we spend all of our time with you guys, I think, the most, right? We all have our agile development, pivots in the roadmap. I think from our perspective, we'd really like to know, what would make the conversation better? What would make the communication better? What would make the process better for you guys? If you have comments, we can start with you and then go to us.
Let's start with your pet peeves.
We know you've got them. We've got thick skin.
When a ticket doesn't have enough information for $200, Alex.
I've been online.
Come on, don't be shy, guys.
And see, this is the problem. When you don't talk and then we don't get any feedback, and so we just think everything's fine, and then we don't know how to fix it.
Don't look at me, India.
No, actually, I'm looking at Sage. Come on. You always have a question.
Sorry, what was the question?
How do we make the process better during development?
Oh, I thought it was just that.
That's a part of it.
Check. Let's see. I think one thing is having all the necessary people on board with all or most of the meetings from the very beginning. making sure PMs don't have to have necessarily a knowledge of programming, but they should have a knowledge of how engineers work, how they try to estimate time, what they can do, and they need to ask them those questions and try to get a sense if the engineer is really saying, if they're saying what they want to hear, or if they're actually saying how much time it's going to take. And that involves having a certain level of trust and knowledge of each other.
How many of you engineers pad your time by less than 5%? How many of you
Never.
engineers pad your time by less than 35%? What is your number?
I don't know. I often shortchange myself, so they help by actually building and padding sometimes.
We do some planning and some scheduling for you guys, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, we try not to pad. I think just good communication is the most important part. Like,
Definitely.
if you think about how we are thinking of things, like we're thinking about trade-offs, we're thinking about how much we're investing in something and what the outcome is and what we get out of it. I think if you guys were thinking the same way, that's really helpful. How much time am I spending on this? Is it worth it? Does it move the needle? Have those conversations with us. You know, like you said, we don't know how to code. We don't know when something's going to be, hey, this would be easy if we did it this way.
Yeah, actually, something I think that you and Max have been talking about a lot is having us think more like product managers.
Yeah.
And not just think about, is this code going to work, or does this UI look good, but all kinds of other things that, especially, is this, for us, is this going to help our product in the shortest amount of time? Is this priority 1 or 2 or 3 instead of 20?
Yeah, thinking
right
from
now?
the customer perspective. Is the customer going to care about this? Does it
Yeah.
really matter that much? Can I do something faster? Can we get it to market faster? Can we get customer feedback faster?
Yeah, and for engineers, that translates to don't go down rabbit holes of making this incredibly perfect. You know, we're not trying to worry about pixel perfect. You know, comparing to the Figma files, having it pixel perfect right now.
Or crazy edge cases, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think one really interesting point in one and is focusing on the customer impact, right? Like, I think it's very easy for us to get into conversations of like, oh, this microservice does this, and then pass this message along to that, and this will be delivered then, and this microservice will be pushed then at this point. But for our perspective, right, because we are trying to set expectations with sales, with customer success, we really want to focus in on the impact. And one thing that I think that it gets, at least have really bitten me, is sometimes when, you know, engineers, you guys have a really strong understanding of the system and how that might impact different features. But we might not have that same context. So it's very important that, like, when we push out some change that, like, maybe let's say remove certain features or remove certain functionalities, that we get alerted to, like, by the way, certain things that the customer's doing today will break, right? You can say, oh, well, this service will be going away. Well, for us, it's really hard to kind of do that logical jump, or we might not even have that knowledge of this service is critical for this previous functionality. But for us to make sure we have this clear channel of communication with customers, we have to know what is the impact this change might make. And those are the things that, like, for us as product manager, I think is absolutely critical.
And
I'll say one more thing, and then I'll shut up. Another thing that I think is really important and took me a long time was, as an engineer, have the courage to push back
Yes,
when
please.
people are planning stuff, because especially if you're a junior engineer or you don't know the people well enough, you'll be like, okay, they told me this is what we should do, blah, blah, blah. But if you have some knowledge of what it takes, et cetera, and you're like, nah, this is too quick, or this is too much scope creep, or whatever, don't be afraid to push back.
Yeah, that's a good point. No one wants to hear, you know, something that isn't true just to be pleased. You want to hear the truth.
And I think one technique that's really powerful, at least to me, and needs to think how you adjust it to remote, is just walking between tables and kind of, as early in the process as possible, I always kind of go between the tables and, you know, take this engineer for a 5-minute discussion about some idea I have and ask another engineer about another question. So I try to do the product discussion significantly earlier than, as early as possible, and make it shorter bites. So I don't come with a full plan and then have a 1 hour discussion about it. Or maybe I do if it's a big product, but later. But I try to kind of like get the feedback early on. So then when we have the 1 hour discussion, first of all, everyone in the room already has context. Second, I already know what everyone's going to say, so I can kind of tailor the product. And it also creates opportunity for everyone to provide feedback. Because when you go, a lot of the time people will not reach out to you proactively, but if you already have a discussion with them, they're going to give you input about the thing you talked about with them, and also about everything else they have in mind. So it's just creating those opportunities, those discussions. And remotely, that's, I think, where a lot of the value is lost, like when you move remotely and like we'll still need to figure out how you do it. We're a small team, so it's easier, but when you're a big team, it becomes harder.
Deborah asked about pet peeves. I would ask you guys about roadmap changes, sudden changes, pivot changes. You must have an opinion about like how smoothly that goes or doesn't go. Something that we could do better communication-wise or process-wise to make that easier, because it happens all the time. Anybody?
I think I have a comment about it.
Okay.
I think it's, in general, it's a good thing when we want to pivot, because it means, you know, you guys figured out something that we didn't know. So it's more about, is there a way to do like mini pivots or tests or experiments or whatever what would you guys call that? If there was a way to do an experiment without having to change, without having to really pivot.
I think we kind of just did that when you think about the AI project, right, that we did. We took a small set of people, we set them aside, we didn't change our overall roadmap, and we did a quick test to get something out into the market. I think what was important in that is we were at a good place where whoever was working on a particular item on the roadmap, they could hand off to other people. That was the contribution that was really important, so that we could pivot other people to a new project.
I think from our perspective, what would be helpful to get from you all is to know when we're being painted into a corner, when the code is going to preclude us from doing something else. We do try to keep an open mind about all the other avenues, and I'm always with my teams like, I don't want to paint it into a corner, so you know, if we do this, are we going to not be able to do something in the future? But I don't know all the necessary inputs, and there's always going to be some unexpected pivot, as smart as I try to look. So if you're asked to develop something and you realize or recognize that by doing this we're locking into some functionality or into some process, let everybody know so that at least you're documenting that and build that time in should something come down the road.
I think architecture decisions too, like if you let us know, hey, if we do something a little bit different, spend a little bit more time, it's going to give us these gains in the future, we are all about it. We want to hear it.
And I think in terms of figuring out those pivot points, selling those designs, right? A lot of times we're leaning forward on our skis and saying like, oh, this is how it's going to work. And if the customer's like, not interested, we know that's a really strong signal. But if someone's like, hey, here's some money, I'm ready to sign. That's what I mean. A lot of times, at least from my perspective, it's like, all right, let's turn the wheel, let's get this done. And sometimes you get some other projects that get put on the back burner because someone's willing to just, hey, here's $50,000. I want this problem solved.
I think we saw one more question.
Oh,
two.
Great. So I'm fairly new here. I just wanted to know, you just started getting into like a technical review or an architectural review and those elements and how they weigh into what's being done. Do you incorporate that very early on in the prioritization and planning aspects? Or is that more as development is going, hey, this is going to be a headache, so it's going to drag out a little bit longer? Like, yeah, how's that?
I would say as early as possible.
Yeah, I mean, ideally. I'm just saying, what typically do you do? Yeah.
Whenever we start talking about a big headline, me and Max will talk about like, what do we do now? What do we do in the future? How does this build? And we talk about the architecture of it early on. All I want to know is like Deborah said, are you painting us into a corner? He never is, but Like, then we talk about how much time we spend on something. We might prioritize a little bit differently
Okay,
and
that's
give
yeah.
something more time to be
Yep.
worked on.
Okay, so it does weigh into the
It-
the time does weigh into the prioritization. Yeah, I think that's a very good thing. So yeah, just making sure.
So my question might relate to both product planning as well as development, but basically just going back to the pet peeves, like as an engineer, sometimes it's frustrating when I'm working on something that I know is like a feature or a product that won't be supported like 6 months or a year down the line just because we're supporting it for now. So when it comes to like sunsetting a product or feature, what are some of the best strategies and techniques you have to like balance development there?
So I think the first thing that's important to understand is that like sunsetting a product is as important as, like doing it well is as important as launching your new product. So I think working on a product that's kind of legacy and it's going to be sunsetted into the future, that's where you can really earn your customers by doing the transition well and still supporting this product. Customers appreciate it because this product might be legacy for the company, but for the one customer that uses it and their entire infrastructure is dependent on it, that's like their entire business is dependent on that. So that's important to them, and I think doing there as good job as you do on your new features, is very valuable to the company as well, even though it may sometimes feel a bit pointless. And I think that for me, what helped, and I did have this experience, like it's just being very transparent with the customer and giving them all of the options and talking to them in advance, understanding the challenges, and kind of solving this problem holistically. Like, we're going to sunset this product, but here's what we recommend you do next. Like, if you were this customer, what information would you need and what should they do next? Providing some kind of consultation services, either literally consulting or in a more scalable way via documentation and videos.
Okay, I don't want to skip enablement. I know, Peter, you were passionate about this one. Since you're selling to businesses, how do you enable the rest of your team and company?
Yeah, I think I'm sitting on the panelists here as the only non-co-founder, so potentially that's, I think you guys get brought into those conversations very early on, and it's like a part of the natural cycle, but I do want to highlight that for our engineering counterparts, that a lot of our jobs, especially in startup, in early stage startup, because we don't have dedicated product marketing or dedicated folks who are enabling the sales folks, it's typically us who are directly teaching sales engineers, like, hey, here's the general demo flow, here's what are the gotcha areas, but here are all the values and how you can try to, get the customer to understand why they should buy your product. So I think that's one of the areas that like we can definitely get some of you guys' help on as well, right? Like as you're writing the documentations, think about how someone is typically going to be using it. What are those gotcha points, right? Those are sometimes more useful to us than, oh, here's this like edge case on when this special, edge case happens when in 0.0001% of the time. It's much more important for us to know, like, okay, here are the typical use cases and here are the typical gotchas that you think someone had, if they're going to work through this end to end, might hit. So yeah, and I think for us, it's also enablement is a great area for us to get feedback and again, going back to the cycle of product discovery, right? Figuring out whether or not this lands well with the sales team, whether or not this lands well with our product or with our champions. So yeah.
Where you say sales, we say marketing, because we're going straight with ads to customers. So same thing though, we're enabling marketing, we're talking about the value prop. They're out there seeing if the value prop lands, if it meets the right expectations with customers, so different people, same goal.
Exactly.
We've got a minute left. Any questions? I think you had an enablement question, right, Nick?
Yeah, so my question was, I saw sales, service, and support in product enablement. I didn't see marketing, and I suppose that might be because we're very early stage,
Yes.
and the product managers are doing a lot of the marketing. But yeah, can you talk a little bit how you're thinking about that?
I should have 100% added marketing for us.
With Jordan, which is an early marketing hire,
Yes,
right? So,
yes.
yeah.
For us, like, building out the community and the marketing, getting the value prop out there and setting the expectations with customers, I mean, it's critical. The people that are becoming our champions are the people that are active in the community. Jordan has us kind of sponsoring programs with influencers, and their community will glom onto Boombox, so they become advocates. Like, it's really important, everything that they do. They're basically performing.
The Boomcast, right? Check it out.
The Boomcast. And the
wherever
mic check.
Podcast is sold.
Yes.
And I can share one story is that in previous roles, what we did is we actually offered our clients, we realized we had an enablement problem, an integration problem, and we offered our clients to do the integration with them. So we sent engineers to their site. Before COVID, it was more more typical. We sent engineers to their sites. They went through the integration with them and just took notes of everything they didn't understand, everything that needed to be clarified. We then took those notes and it was the most, the easiest, the least sophisticated improvements. Just clarified our docs, add a few SDKs, like the most simplest stuff. This is the thing that, as I worked on this product for 3 years, the thing that shot up our sales by 300%. And the most impactful thing I did was the one that required the least complexity, least intelligence, just like go to your customers, see what they're struggling with, and most of the improvements were even doc-wise, not even engineers, like just improving our docs. It cut our lead time for 4 weeks to 5 days, and time, I think, is the #1 factor that kills sales. So if integration takes 5 days for the pilot, then everything is much more likely to succeed. So I'm a big fan of it, and it's usually pretty easy, but just people hate to do it because it is writing docs. It is kind of doing the not really working on your product, but on the peripherals.
We are out of time. I want to thank the panelists. Thank you guys for asking questions.